You didn't see this coming, did you? Okay, just checking it still. Well, it's been forever, hasn't it? Since this whole year kicked off. But don't worry. It's taken me forever, but I'm back. I've got my creative juices flowing again. I'm motivated. Tomorrow is broken. Tomorrow is nowhere. Well, that's because tomorrow is now with Black Star by Hasso Toby. A year has passed since the Phantom Thieves struck down a god and saved Tokyo from a terrible fate. But when people all over the globe begin to suffer from paranoia syndrome, mysterious seizures which leave them contorted and unconscious, Akira Kurusu, not Ren Amamiya, Akira Kurusu, because that was his name in the Persona 5 manga. In the anime, it's Ren Amamiya. Akira Kurusu finds himself in the Velvet Room once more, demanding answers for the affliction. His investigation leads him to the Dead Sea, the rotted remnants of the cognitive world, where all things go to be forgotten, including someone the thieves had fought to be long gone. Meanwhile, Akira's comatose body is found in the waking world, and his terrified friends suspect the worst. Akira's confidants struggle to learn the truth behind paranoia syndrome, while he and Goro Akechi approach a fated confrontation in the decaying shell of the cognitive Tokyo. As the sickness continues to spread, the Phantom Thieves must reunite and destroy the evil festering beneath the Dead Sea's waters, before its malignant influence unravels civilization forever. So, from that description alone, things are not going to be hunky-dory. Yeah, apologies for completely failing to mention this. This obviously takes place after Persona 5, so if you haven't played the game, stop right now and go and play it, because it is an amazing game. Also, play Persona 5 Royal. That is incredible. So far, on Persona 5 Royal, I've gotten up to Futaba's Palace, and I'm taking a break from it, but I'll get back to it soon. For the moment, it's time for me to finally bring life to this channel with new quotes. There's no banishing of anything, only conquering within. Make it enough for read suffering without end. Dennis Johnson, Minutes. What are we coming to? I just don't know anymore. Radiohead, Black Star. I know Radiohead because of the joke in the Lego Movie Part 2. Radiohead is not Elliott Smith, is all I'm gonna say about it. Chapter 1. Hajimemashou. In the city that was not the city, the streets had no signs. Only slates of blank metal hanging askew on their poles, as if confused how they came to be there. All cupboards bare, all bulbs gone dark, all photographs reduced to mottled film nestled within unbroken frames. As for one day a great wind had blown through these ashen streets, and scraped clean every trace of habitation in its wake. And everywhere he went there was water, ice cold and dark as ink, sometimes so shallow as to be barely noticeable, a thin scum of shine on the asphalt. But in other places it could come up to his knees, and so he always watched his step. In the early days, he'd once fallen into the deeper places, and had spent ages clutching himself and shivering himself dry again. Impossible to keep warm here. The sky was the color of pig iron, and the sun was no sun he'd ever known. He kept above ground when possible, but had to watch his step there as well. Whenever he stepped into one of those blinded and gutted buildings, he would grip the doorframe and squeeze. Often it held fast, but sometimes steel would bend like rubber, or masonry would crumple like stale bread in his grip. And then he had to leave, and quickly, because the solidity too was drained away from everything here. It all bent and faded like a dream, until it finally collapsed. Often he would be awakened from his huddled sleep by the distant thunder of a fallen building, its rubble breaking it down into that black water until nothing remained. He slouched through the streets and listened and watched. In places the shadows writhed and clotted, and sometimes he would wait to see what arose from there. But now he kept moving, head tilted slightly like a dog's, the water sounding off his uneven footfalls. At one point, he froze in place and listened for that familiar sound, that sinister rattle, but heard only the hollow wind and the lapping water. Then he lowered his head and began to walk again. Sadayo Kawakami gripped her chalk like an instrument of war. She could hear the constant low susurrus of chatter behind her like the sound of the ocean as she worked, scratching neat white lines across the chalkboard. It was morning in Chujin Academy, and the air outside was brisk, the sun tantalizingly bright. She glanced behind her and saw approximately a fifth of the class gazing longingly out the windows. On days like this, it was easy to understand why Ushimaru was so fond of using his own chalk to demonstrate the finer points of ballistics. It couldn't be helped. It was November 5th, late enough for her students to recover from post-midterm trauma, but too early for the threat of finals to really sink into their heads. Today, in real life, it's November 5th. That's right. And times like these were when the classrooms were at their rowdiest. Not to mention she was dealing with first years. Still, she soldiered on. "All right, settle down," she said, futility hanging off every word. She turned back to her podium and leaned forward. The students in the front row, at least, shut up and straightened to attention. They were new to the school, but had still heard the rumors. Miss Kawakami stood about 5'5" in tall shoes, and often looked like she was coming off a straight week with no sleep. But sometime last fall, she'd shed her lethargic nature and became a firebrand of a teacher. Woe betide any student whom she decided was in need of guidance, because she would grab onto them like a bear trap until they fell in line. "So, to pick up where we left off," she said, "while Shakespeare's obviously been revered in the West, his translations have had a little more trouble in this part of the world. In particular, his blank verse and predilection for wordplay have posed difficult challenges for Japanese speakers. Still, there's been a rich history of his works over here as well. Shoyo Tsubochi could be considered the forerunner in bringing the bard's place to Japan, having translated the entirety of his canon in the late 1920s. But other academics have further refined what he started. There have even been times when the cultural differences between East and West have led to deeper understanding of the works themselves. Tsubochi was fond of dipping into kabuki tradition in his adaptation of the plays. And for those of you who think all of this is too boring to handle, Akira Kurosawa drew from Macbeth as inspiration for his film Throne of Blood. I'd recommend that one, by the way. Excellent cinematography. "I'm seeing a few intrigued faces here," she said dryly. "Why so surprised? A teacher can have geeky interests too, you know." A ripple of giggles went through the room. She smiled and went on. "Anyway, I'm sure Miss Chono will go into more detail about this, but the point I'm making is that opening yourself up to unfamiliar perspectives can really broaden your understandings of the world. You're young now, but you still shouldn't lock yourselves in too much to just one way of thinking. You might find that it can... She leaned forward. "Miss Sakura? Miss Sakura." Several heads turned to a particular figure in the back row of the class. Bespectacled, orange-haired, and perched on her seat like a spindly gargoyle. They couldn't see what she was looking at on her phone, but she seemed much more interested in it than she was in Kawakami's lecture. Kawakami groaned internally. She'd had problem students before, but Futaba Sakura was in a class of her own, in multiple senses of the phrase. She wasn't rude, or abusive, or even particularly antisocial. All of those things could have been dealt with via more traditional discipline. It was that she treated the world around her like a mildly amusing distraction, and had bewildering relationships with chairs, and despite her erratic attention span, she showed academic proficiency that the Shujin faculty found impressive, and then suspicious, and then slightly unsettling. The girl didn't just break the curve, she atomized it. Trying to rattle her with surprise questions or pop quizzes was guaranteed to backfire. Still, Kawakami gave it a try. "Miss Sakura," she said, "since you seem so interested in your phone, maybe you can entertain us by pulling up and reading one of Shakespeare's more famous soliloquies. I'm thinking of a certain passage from Act 5, Scene 5 of Macbeth." No response. "If you need another hint, perhaps one of your classmates could—" "She should have died hereafter," Futaba recited in monotone. "There would have been time for such a word. Tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow. Life creeps along its petty pace from day to day, to the last syllable of recorded time, and all our yesterdays have lighted fools away to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle. Life's but a—" She trailed off, yawned, and continued. "Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing." Wow, Futaba's really been doing well, hasn't she? I didn't know that she was interested in Shakespeare. "Well done," said Kawakami after a moment. "If you really want to impress me, though, then next time you can recite it without reading off your phone." "Oh, I wasn't reading it. Was watching a video of a baby goat." She grinned and held up the phone for her to see. "Look, he's wearing a tiny sweater." More laughter from the class, louder this time. Kawakami admitted defeat. All right, she sighed. "Just, please no phones during class." Futaba dutifully put it away. "You won't be expected to recite the play's chapter and verse during your finals, but keep in mind these prominent figures during their translation, and be sure to—" She trailed off again. This time her expression was significantly more concerned. The other students followed her gaze. The students had all cracked up at Futaba's triumph, save one. Tsukiko Minami, second row from the back, had kept her head down for the last several minutes. At first, Kawakami had just thought she'd been daydreaming. The girl wasn't a bad student, but she was slightly spacey and had a reputation for nasty gossip. But now, she saw Tsukiko clutching the edges of her desk hard enough to whiten the knuckles. Her skin, too, was pale, and sheened with sweat. "What is it, Minami?" No response. "Tsukiko, are you okay?" "Fine," she said, between hoarse breaths. Her voice was faint, almost strangled. "Just, could everyone stop looking at me? There's someone looking at me." "It probably could be the teacher because you are feeling unwell. I don't think you're fine." Her whole body had started to shake. The class began to mutter. "Could someone take Tsukiko to the nurse, please?" Kawakami asked. "She isn't feeling well." "On it," said Futaba. She hopped off her seat and laid a hand on Tsukiko's shoulder. "Hey, it's cool. I've been there. It sucks when you're in a crowd and you start to freak." Tsukiko spun round in her seat and gripped Futaba by the front of her blouse like someone drowning, eyes bulging, teeth bared. And everyone in the class saw Futaba's skin go pale as the hands clutched her. because the world somehow swam in Futaba's vision. It fogged around her like she'd just awoken from deep sleep. And in that moment she saw Tsukiko encircled by chains, dark and mottled chains that constricted face and limbs and chest, pulling tight enough so that her flesh dimpled and bruised through the links, so that Futaba thought she heard the wet creak of splintering bone. Oh, crap. "Please," she whispered. "It hurts." Then the world snapped back into place, and it was just Tsukiko again, losing her grip, falling forward, and striking the ground head first. The bell rang shortly thereafter, but no one heard it. It was drowned by the pandemonium of the class, chairs scraping and gouging the tiles as students stood with their phones held high like torches, Tsukiko's own chair clattering to the floor, Kawakami crying for calm, for someone to call an ambulance. And Futaba herself was forgotten, huddled in the corner, knees pulled up to her chin. From where she sat, the desks and chairs stood in parallel like prison bars, and through them, Tsukiko's widened, staring eye. Well, this is a fun way for me to go back to YouTube, isn't it? With someone getting chained up psychically and then apparently getting Freddy Kruegered. Boy.